Number 6. The editing. Perhaps it was pointless for me to mention all the grammatical errors throughout the story since Aizuki lives in the Philippines, meaning English probably isn't his first language. But I have to put my foot down when it makes it hard to read the story. Some of the worst examples include Chapter 28's I got sent here also as a request of my test of abilities, and most infamously of all, Chapter 34's but now I will you and him and all of you, but not without satisfying my sadism. There's only so much I can take. But what makes it even worse is the repetition. The characters in the narrative reiterate things we already know. This image got abused, and I got bored. It didn't help that characters can't seem to focus on one thing at a time, bringing up topics that really should be saved for another time. You might have hated the "we have two Takurus here" the most, but the one that always stood out for me was way back in Chapter 8, when Takeru started rambling about how the time trains look more like trailer trucks than actual trains, in the middle of a battle. I also got pretty annoyed every time a character opened their mouth, and not just because of run-on sentences, but because very rarely would we get another dialogue tag besides said or asked. Sure, going in the opposite extreme is laughable, redundant, or sometimes just straight up wrong, but it's less boring. Another problem is Aizuki's inability to tell a narrative. We are told things happen. Important things that should be focused on are not elaborated on. Characters just happen to know things because if they didn't, the plot couldn't progress. And instead of taking any of these problems and making them part of the story, he just repeats shit we already know and uses it to pad out the chapters. Every single two-parter could have been condensed into one if Aizuki cut out all the filler, or he could have just replaced it with something relevant. It's like he was struggling for ideas for the story. Hey, wait a minute! Number 7. The stuff Aizuki stole from other sources. A lot of Aizuki's ideas involve taking plots from various seasons of Super Sentai and Power Rangers, have it happen to a different character, only to do nothing new with the material. Again, the reason Super Sentai and Power Rangers have lasted decades is because they can do something different with it. Sure, the patterns are getting annoying, but they are able to retain certain amounts of charm. But Aizuki wasn't content with stealing ideas from the show. No. I've had this theory for a while that Aizuki might have not even written this story if it wasn't for Super Sentai vs. Super Sentai, a fanfiction written by Chris X. I asked Chris X his thoughts on the matter, and this is what he had to say. I just think he half-assed it. It's like he reads my fic and was like, "Oh, that was fun or titillating for me. I know, I'll copy it and tinker with it for lighter and softer without actually comparing with what I took from that episode." This results in a very half-assed tribute, and sometimes, when combined with his lust, it gets disturbing. You know, when I think of plots, I base it off cliches in the Super Sentai series, combined with other elements that is from other media. In that vein, I'm no different from him. I also copy from other things. But overall, I think Aizuki's problem is that he has a very juvenile mindset, like a childish person who doesn't know what is actually proper and what is actually not. He's like a kid. Funny thing is, I found out he's older than me. You know the time that he said he didn't quite like Bokendra anymore? I think it's because the other guy he truly looked up to, Fantasy Leader, has stated his opinion that he really didn't like Bokendra, saying it's the worst Sentai to him. So I got the gut feeling Aizuki was unable to come up with his own identity and instead tried to latch onto other people's mindset. But without his own self-built opinion that belonged only to him, it'll end up as a disaster, as seen in how he tried to copy my chapters. He tried to be me, but he can't, because he's not me. So he copied stories and ended up weaker. I do know that even my stories have its flaws, especially those Aizuki copied kind of showed where I got things wrong. But hey, it's like you said, no such thing as a perfect thing. People can say my fic is the best Sentai fic either, but it's not without its flaws. More than linguistic flaws, mind you. Then again, I never treated myself as the perfect writer. All I can say about this is what he took from me. If he wanted to be inspired by my chapter, changing the outcome is not enough. Find the core, modify the rest. He did not modify the core at all, so it looks weak. Regardless, what he copied off of me looks really weak, because he did not have a good self-foundation, only latched onto someone else. All I can say about it is that he needs to mature up first before trying to be inspired by others. If he wants to be inspired by something, don't be inspired by one's work, but be inspired by one's maturity. Man, that ends up cheesy. Cheesy perhaps, but you speak truly, Chris. Number 8. TV tropes. There is no doubt that Azuki is familiar with the website tvtropes.org, a site that lists off recurring themes and motifs in fiction. His use of certain terms comes straight from the site, and one in particular shapes how he portrays the villains, one I have used myself during this Let's Read. The complete monster. A villain with no redeeming value, the most evil character in the setting, the one who has done something so heinous they don't deserve sympathy. Numerous such characters exist in the story, but Azuki portrayed them, and frankly most of the villains for that matter, in the exact same way. Bloodthirsty, mustache twirlers that readers can't take seriously. It was in chapter 30, when Umbrella was enthusiastic about the idea of causing pain and suffering, where I realized that Azuki has a set standard for a complete monster. See, the reason this trope applies to Umbrella in the show is not because he's a bloodthirsty maniac. It's because of his apathy. He does not care his weapons are being used for destructive and malevolent purposes. As long as he gets paid, and he can just move on to another galaxy should he use up the one he's working in, he does not care. When called out on this, Azuki decided to throw in even more violence, but add in sexual deviancy among the villains. Now, can a complete monster be a sexual sadist? Absolutely, but not all complete monsters are complete monsters for the same reasons. There were plenty of moments that showed Radiguet was a complete monster in the show, but being a horny bastard who will capture and rape any woman he finds attractive was not one of them. There are other tropes Azuki abused, like Butt Monkey, which is given to characters he doesn't like, but this is the one that was the most noteworthy. Number 9. How to fix this. I said there was a way this concept can work, and I meant it. Of course, it would have to require tossing Azuki's premise entirely for reasons already stated. Because let's face it, having all the action take place in only one of the dimensions, having the majority of the cast be from one side and not the other, and more importantly, having no direction whatsoever, that's unacceptable. You may or not agree completely with everything I'm about to suggest here, but that's the inevitable result when talking about fanfiction. Here it goes. If I was making this rewrite, it would involve the current teams, the Dino Charge Rangers and the Ninjas. In the Power Rangers universe, we begin with Fury releasing a monster from confinement. Let's call this monster Black Ho, due to its ability to create portals. Meanwhile, the Rangers are working on a way to use their Dino Drive Chargers outside of the Megazord safely. When they encounter Black O, it gets a hold of one of these prototype Dino Chargers to boost its own abilities. You see where I'm going here? Meanwhile, in the Super Sentai universe, QAmon creates a yokai that can bring the dead back to life. Let's call this monster Yokai Fukuyu. While this is going on, the Ninjas are trying out new mech configurations with the combination Shuriken, until the monster makes an appearance. The battle will involve Yokai Fukuyu restoring itself to giant size before QAmon can do that instead. And here's the wrinkle. It does so the moment the Ninjas use the combination Nin Shuriken. I think you can guess what happens next. That's correct. The battle taking place in both universes happen at the same time, leading to a massive tear in the dimensional barrier between the two. Now, this wouldn't lead to the two universes merging completely, at least not right away. It would be a slow process over the course of the story. As it progresses, a group of Sentai veterans would join forces with the Dino Charge Rangers in the Power Rangers universe, and a group of Rangers veterans would join up with the Ninjas in the Sentai universe. The ones I had in mind were Right, Akko, which would be actively defying Azuki's fetish for Guy, Kenta, Joe, Tsuruhime, and Beta J Stag for the Sentai veterans. While Scott, Justin, Carlos, Taylor, Jen, and Cam would be the Power Rangers veterans, joining up with the Ninjas. Likewise, a group of Sentai villains would be restored and or brought to the Power Rangers universe by the Rift, and likewise a group of Power Rangers villains would be brought to the Sentai universe. They would of course join forces with Sledge and QAmon in an attempt to defeat the heroes, with Sledge and QAmon promising the way to bring them back to their own universes is to A. defeat the heroes, and B. bring them the Energems and the End Shuriken respectively. These villains would consist of Schwartz, Tranza, again defying Azuki by not having Radiguet as the villain representing Jetman, Angimas, Gardenoid Gash, the Flower Konichi team, and Enter for the Sentai villains. And Crunch, General Havoc, Darkonda, Onakage, Frax, and Zergain for the Power Rangers villains. Throughout the story, we would go back and forth between the two universes as the heroes and villains tried a way to fix the rift while opposing each other. Depending on who was the focus of the chapter, their finishing weapons and mechs would travel through the rift to aid in battle against the monster of the week. Of course, Arconda and Enter would have plans of their own. Darkonda wanting to prevent the restoration of the rift from succeeding because its restoration would mean he would go back to being dead, while Enter would be more interested in experimenting on both universes, trying to keep it stable but still allowing access to both. Their efforts would backfire, of course, leading to the true villains of the story making their appearance. Who would these villains be? Ventrix and Diamu. This would lead to a final showdown between the heroes and the villains in their respective universes before the two universes are forced together into a chaotic, massless void. The four teams would not be alone in taking down Ventrix and Diamu, however, as this is when the Go Rangers and the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers make their appearance, and together they finally stop the villains and separate the two universes for good. Now, you're probably thinking this bears similarities with Chris X's story, but remember, this is supposed to be the good version of Super Sentai vs. Power Rangers, which was actively trying to rip him off. An explanation for what's going on, an end goal what heroes and villains strive for, conflict and proper interaction between the characters, actual stakes. It's everything that Azuki's story is not. As much fun as it was to come up with this concept, it does pain me to think that this is not what we got. All in all, Super Sentai vs. Power Rangers was a bad story, and I'm glad it's over. What will happen with Azuki next? I have no idea, though a live blogger by the name of Arcade Rika is taking a look at some of Azuki's other works he made before Super Sentai vs. Power Rangers. So if you can't get enough of this delusional man, Rika can satisfy you. Me? I've had enough. If you want a good fanfiction in this genre, stick with Power Rangers Take Flight by Joe Rovang, a story that takes footage from Jetman and turns it into a hypothetical Power Ranger season. I recommend you check it out, it's very interesting. I'm pretty sure Azuki would hate it given his love for Jetman, but who cares what he thinks. Right now, I'm just glad that I can finally put all this behind me and declare